Over my decades of being a DBZ fan, if there's one criticism that I've heard most frequently, it's that all the games are far too similar. And up through, well, the release of Battle of Z, and aside from several handheld releases, I'd have to completely agree. Now, this isn't to say that the Budokai Tenkaichi or the DragonBallZ games weren't fun. I mean, hell, I've made some of my best memories gaming with them. But the main issue was that none of these titles ever pushed the boundaries and did something noticeably different with the material. Instead, sticking by the same old cash cow, Raditz through Kid Buu storyline. In fact, it wasn't until FighterZ released and shook up the space that I began to vaguely remember there was once a game fairly similar to this. One that attempted to go out of the comfort zone and reach an audience of perhaps more traditional fighting games. One that I, as a child, completely dismissed as utter trash, just because it was out of my comfort zone. That game was Super DragonBallZ. Not to be confused with the similarly titled anime, Super DragonBallZ was released initially at arcades in late 2005, before later being ported to the PlayStation 2 console the following year. And at the time, I think it's safe to say, although I was always open to diversity in DBZ games, this one in particular confused the hell out of me. So much so that I never saw it through till now. And what a better way to explore my curiosity than by replaying it to its absolute entirety. And in this review, we'll discuss why Super DragonBallZ is such a unique title. If, upon replay, I found it to be better than my initial playthrough, and of course, the ins and outs of the game as a whole. I'd like to start off by saying that it's hardly an exaggeration to state that few DBZ games have captured my intrigue quite as quickly as this particular title. The first and perhaps most notable point of this interest is the game's graphics, which appear vastly different than any title I've played prior. While typical DBZ games seem to draw inspiration from the anime, Super DBZ's presentation is clearly manga inspired. First, noted by the stages, which look as if they came straight off the panels of the manga itself. These battlefields are also completely destructible, which seems almost a given at this day and age, but at time of release, this was something we had almost never seen prior. Some of my favorites here were the Cell Games Arena, and of course the World Tournament stage. Kicking somebody straight into that wall just never got old. This manga-like aesthetic is also noted by the accessories of each of the cast, the attacks, and even the boom or flop illuminating from each of the hit effects. All in all, the game goes above and beyond to make it feel like you're playing through the manga specifically. While I could easily understand how this title may not be as flashy as some might prefer, and trust me, that's a completely valid opinion. Personally, I not only found this to be refreshing, an extremely unique take on a Dragon Ball game, but also visually appealing, almost giving me a nostalgic vibe of classic Dragon Ball, although it's Dragon Ball Z, which is something that I likely wouldn't have appreciated quite as much as a kid. Aside from the actual gameplay, this style is present throughout the entirety of the game. Even the main menu itself is reminiscent of a page straight out of the manga, and quickly became one of my favorite and most memorable mode selection screens of all time. These panels also offer us 7 unique modes to explore, 2 of which requiring us to fight through a handful of enemies, and compared to most modern DBZ games, these guys are absolutely no pushovers. While it is no secret that traditional fighting games of this nature are typically geared toward a 2-player experience, still the depth of the 1-player modes is relatively impressive. The first of which, titled Original, is, well, the closest thing to a proper story mode you'll set your eyes on while playing this game. Because while not having much of a story per se, it takes us through 7 challengers, each increasing in power and difficulty as you progress, reflected uniquely by their battle power, which is shown in a really cool format on little scouters before each battle. Not to go too off topic, but a cool detail that I enjoyed is that these scouters tend to break when encountering more powerful opponents. Like in this case, Perfect Cell, whose battle power is much over 9,000. Cell is in fact so impactful to this game that he is the only battle or time in its entirety where a full-on pre- and post-fight cutscene is displayed on his behalf. Bro really thinks he's that guy. And even more odd, the fact that Majin Buu is a playable character in the game, yet you never face off against him. I mean, what? I just can't comprehend why. I mean, he's not even a secret unlock. Speaking of which, these secret or additional characters can only be unlocked via wishes in dragon summoning mode. Initially, 3 characters will be available in the enhanced wish section, but after completing about 10 or so hunts for the Dragon Balls, 2 even more secret characters can be unlocked, bringing the roster from 13 to a modest 18 playable fighters. Okay, you got me. This might not seem like much, and I mean, it really isn't. So it may surprise you even more, with such a small roster, they still chose to implement some really unique characters. Like Videl, Mecha Frieza, Demon King Piccolo. What the hell is DKP doing here? And freaking Chi-Chi. Chi-Chi. This roster is diverse. Now for a Budokai Tenkaichi game, this would be much less jarring. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. But for a game that already has such a minuscule roster, I found it to be, at the very least, a weird marketing decision. Cool for the hardcore fans who just are curious about how Chi-Chi would play. But to the casual fan or someone simply looking for a good fighting game, maybe not. But to those casual fans, I tell them Chi-Chi is kind of badass though. In fact, all of the characters are, as they not only each feel extremely unique in their movesets, but the game manages to balance the roster exceptionally well, mostly due to each of these characters having varying stats, which helps, say, Chi-Chi have a slight edge given that she has a higher action bar. The action gauge can be utilized by either double tapping to dash or by rushing an opponent with a devastating blow. Thank God for this, because without the cooldown on the action gauge, this rush attack would be extremely broken. And I'd also imagine it being very frustrating and annoying on the receiving end. On the other hand, some of these characters might excel in other areas, like power or strength, helping to even out the playing field and give distinct advantages and disadvantages to each respective party. But of course, to access some of these more interesting characters, we'll need to utilize Dragon Summoning Mode, which can be accessed by collecting all 7 of the Dragon Balls. Upon summoning Shenron, this devious dragon will not only give you the option to get additional characters, but also some new stages like King Kai's planet, and perhaps more interestingly, different narrators for the mode selection screen. And while Goku and Vegeta are pretty fun to use, I would strongly advise against using the Majin Buu option. This could legitimately drive somebody mad. You can also use these balls to learn a new super attack, or even a rival's attack, like Gohan's Soaring Dragon Strike, and a plethora of attack and defense buffs, among other cool little prizes. The balls themselves can be accumulated easiest by first creating a character card in customization mode, and then playing through original with the respective character you designed the card for. In this case, each battle will grant you a Dragon Ball, and given there's 7 battles here, I think you could guess what the outcome is. Character cards, however, are not only essential for collecting Dragon Balls, but for customizing your roster to better suit your preference in battle and style, granting you the ability to not only alter the color scheme of the cast, or even give them some funky accessories, but utilize their skill tree as well, which will give you your choice of 1 additional perk, usually between 2 or 3 different choices, each time the EXP bar is filled. These upgrades can range from attack and defense buffs, lengthier and quicker recoveries of your ultimate gauge, and even powerful new special moves like Spirit Bomb for Goku, or even instant transmission, which teleports you directly behind or in front of your enemy. That being said, you must choose these carefully though, because once your skill tree is completed, there is no going back, which may sound terrible to some because, of course, you want to get all the attacks and buffs that you possibly can for your favorite character. But trust me, this not only ensures that the cast isn't too overpowered, but also adds to the level of customization that each character receives, which in my opinion is where this game truly shines, allowing everyone to have different attacks and feel more distinct in comparison to their colleagues. Once this skill tree is completed, your character will likely be a force to be reckoned with. I mean, if you thought Majin Vegeta was scary before, you don't even want to imagine what this man is capable of with all those attack buffs. However, while you can't change your skill tree, the game still encourages further grinding with these maxed out characters, because, well, you can further max them out by accessing new supers from other cards you've already completed. Of course, over time, I ended up loving this formula, and each character card I made felt distinctly my own. Also, take my advice, you'll want to grind these character cards out before entering your characters in Z Survivor mode. Here, you'll want to utilize everything you've learned from original mode, as although the first few matches may not be anything special, you are tasked with defeating at least 9 enemies, with each adversary becoming increasingly more of a threat. Some will be tactical, blocking, sidestepping, attacking at appropriate times, while others just spam supers and make it damn near impossible to counter and likely pissing you the hell off. I'm honestly not sure which type is more dangerous, but regardless, you'll want a lot of practice because the combat isn't nearly as simple as the Budokai series, or even more recently, Kakarot. This combat is the real deal and can absolutely deter some players from completing the game. Basic punches and kicks are simple enough. Blocking and sidesteps are also allowed to dodge incoming blows, as well as more uniquely flight, which can be used by essentially double jumping, allowing you to move a bit faster while in air. And last but not least, the action bar is a noob's best friend. But to really excel in this game, you'll want to master your combos and special moves, which in terms of input, I found to be of similar nature to Taiketsu, but this is a real game, so it's much more acceptable. The special moves themselves are not usually overly difficult to perform and will not drain your ki, where in contrast, ultimate attacks will, some much more than others, and took me quite some time to get the feel for. But once good old muscle memory kicked in and I practiced for long enough, these became much less taxing to pull off, and looking back on it, I actually almost prefer this method. Reason being, this game's combat, as opposed to most other DB games, has depth. You actually have to think about what you're doing to become a better player, clearly requiring more skill than other members of the DB family. And of course, having to execute some difficult and at times lengthy combinations can feel super rewarding when finally pulling them off. A prime example of this is again Spirit Bomb, which requires your ultimate gauge to be entirely full to execute, and to fully reap the benefits, we'll need to charge it for a long time. I mean, it isn't that long, but for the speed these flights move, it's pretty damn long. Also, Galagun was one of my favorites to utilize, as it does massive damage, and the repetitious blasts are sure to hit your opponent. It's also worth noting that some characters have the ability to turn Super Saiyan as usual, but it is implemented a bit different in this particular game. Once transformed, although much more powerful, you'll want to get as many hits as possible, as fast as possible, because you only have about 10 seconds in this form, which again I have mixed feelings about. I mean, on one hand, it is really stupid to have to save up your ultimate gauge to use this for just a few seconds, and with the comms always blocking and spamming supers, you may never have a chance to even use it. But to play devil's advocate, this also balances the game even further and makes it so one character isn't much more powerful than the rest. Back to Z Survivor mode. Each fight you complete here will grant you the opportunity to spin the, I guess we'll call it the Dragon Wheel. The wheel will grant you a plethora of options, some benefiting you in the long term and some in the short term. These range from perhaps the easiest option to land on, collecting a Dragon Ball, or 2, an upgrade to help you get through the fights ahead, like attack and defense boosts, faster accumulating XP, and coming towards the later matches, what you really want to utilize, health recovery, which varies from 20% to a full 100%. Sounds easy enough. I'll just always land on health recovery, right? No, you won't. The wheel will start going insanely fast after a while, leading to you having to completely guess when to stop it, and probably making your eyes hurt quite a bit. The one time I actually beat this mode, I stopped the wheel when it was visually 3 options away from health recovery, and used attack and defense buffs prior, some on purpose and some accidentally. But man, that feeling of victory after playing this mode for 100 times was a feeling like no other. But beyond this, you have of course versus mode, which is where you can play against a friend, selecting any stage of your choosing. By the way, if you guys would like to see a follow-up video of me doing a bunch of 2-player material on this game, let me know in the comments below. You also have options and training, where if I were you, I'd spend a solid amount of time here prior to beginning Z Survivor at the very least. But before we do wrap up, let's briefly discuss our overall thoughts on the game. If I enjoyed Super Dragon Ball Z more than my initial playthrough, why this game is so unique, and also why it's so underrated. Although not giving this game the proper chance it deserved as a child, and probably not really comprehending it, replaying this one-off entry 19 years later was an entirely different experience. The manga-inspired design, the uniqueness of each character's moveset, the diversity of the roster itself, and the depth of the combat system, making it so much harder to button mash to beat your buddy in a 1v1. I mean, I just don't think any game was this complex, at least until FighterZ came around. And even still, I had more fun in some areas with this game than FighterZ, although I want to stress some areas. All in all, I think you guys get my points. This game had really surprised me with how enjoyable it actually is. And while I was gearing up to completely trash on this game before playing, my opinions have changed vastly. Because of these attributes, I do think this is one of the more overlooked and underrated Dragon Ball games to have hit the market, at least in the West, and alone stands as a great traditional fighter style Dragon Ball game. If I had to rank this game on a scale of 1 through 10, I'd give it a solid 8.6. And that's on a serious 1 through 10 scale. 10 would be like the best game in the entire freaking world. But alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you guys did enjoy, please make sure to give a like below so I know to make more content like this. Comment below on what you thought of the video, if your opinions are similar to mine, if you like this game, hate this game, what game you want to see next. And please do feel free to subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot and means so much to me. Thank you all for supporting. And as always, see you guys next time. Peace.
That was just careless, don't you think?